Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hello, feed fanatics and grain geeks. Welcome to another edition of the Grain Feed, brought to you by Ever.ag. Each week, we bring you updates on the markets with unique perspectives from an amazing team of analysts with the intention of helping livestock feeders and dairy farmers manage risk. I'm Phil Plourd, filling in for Jim Matthews, who's on assignment this week. That's the bad news. The good news is that we have two exceptional panelists on board for the ride. First, from deep in the heart of Texas, Jake Kingsley, EverAg's Director of Feed Procurement. Hey, Jake.
Good morning, Phil. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And second, sitting 83.2 miles to my west in Platteville, Wisconsin, we welcome Britt O'Connell, Director of EverAg's Grain Foundation Service. Hey, Britt.
Good morning, Phil.
Paige, let's go ahead and timestamp this episode. It's about 9 a.m. Central Time on Thursday, August 10. You know, markets have been a little choppy this week. Right now, this morning, we have nearby corn at $4.83 a bushel, so hanging out under $5. But that's up 2 cents on the day, up 2 cents versus where we were last week. Not a lot of noise there. Nearby beans at $14.38, up 6 cents this morning, up 9 cents from where we were a week ago. And our pesky little friend soy meal at $426 a ton. That's unchanged on the day, down $25 from last week. Guys, I mean, the news cycle feels like we're stuck, right? I mean, there's weather. There's always weather in the summertime, but the peak weather issues may be in the rearview mirror. There's the war in Russia with Russia and Ukraine, and that's terrible, but I'm not sure that we've learned anything new this week. Export sales, we're just sort of grinding along. Tomorrow, Friday, August 11th, we get a new WASDE report. That promises perhaps to stir things up. Jake, what are you seeing from where you sit? What's driving the bus?
Yeah, I think we've kind of gotten into a little bit of a choppy range here on futures, and basis has also kind of stagnated here over the course of the last week. It just feels like folks are kind of settling into a little bit of a range here and just waiting on these new numbers from the WASDE report tomorrow. Like you said, we don't have much for new headlines out of the Black Sea. We really haven't had anything chaotic happening with the weather, and every day that passes, we get closer and closer to finishing this crop off. And so really, folks have just kind of settled in. Thankfully, we've settled in values that look attractive enough to get some ownership started if you hadn't already, so that you've got something done ahead of this report and you can put some sort of protection on if you don't have anything set there. But yeah, I mean, this market's kind of stalled out here for the moment, waiting on this report. I think the anticipation is that we're going to see a little bit of a shakeup potentially in yields. And the question is, do they do anything to exports at this point? So how does that all pan out tomorrow? What's the net change to both corn and protein?
Yeah, so Britt, the consensus right now on corn is that USDA will come out at 175.5 bushels per acre. They were at 177.5 the last go-round. On soybeans, the consensus is at 51.3 bushels per acre. That's down from 52.0 in July. What would qualify as being a big surprise? And how do you see things shaking out in terms of this report?
I think kind of doubling down on what you said about this choppy trade, I think a lot of it goes back to the uncertainty from the yield side of things. We had this early season drought, and then weather across most of the Corn Belt got a lot more amicable to better production. And I think everybody's asking themselves and wondering how much, if any, damage was done with this early season drought. Now, certainly there's some areas that didn't get the reprieve, and it's pretty clear that they saw some pretty significant yield damage. But there's a lot of areas across the country where things have started to look a lot better the last few weeks. And again, I think we're all asking ourselves, is it real? Is it smoke and mirrors? And as I talk with producers around the country, I don't think that I gain any more clarity on that front. I'll talk to one guy who's totally shocked and surprised. He's finding 18, 20, 22 around by 38 and 40 long ears. And then, we've talked to producers who've gone out and taken a batwing mower and mowed off the corn or gotten out into some of these fields and found the pollination was terrible. So to me, I think from a production standpoint, the market has found a place where it's comfortable. Because it's so uncertain, it feels like they don't want to make a drastic move. I think the USDA is right to come in here and trim yield by a couple of bushels on corn. In my opinion, I think you could see that trimmed even further, because even if they do come in north of 175, that's still a really strong yield number if you look at history. We haven't had a lot of years where we've been over 175, and we've certainly had some challenges this year. Now, the soybeans, I'm a little less convicted that we could see a big trim there. I think they're calling for a little over a half of a bushel. That probably feels warranted, but that might hit it. We've had really nice weather for beans. And I remember back to 2012 where we had that really bad Midwest drought, very different than this year, undoubtedly. But the key there was we started to receive really timely rains as we got into the back half of July and August, much like we did now. And beans benefited greatly from that. And we saw beans well outperform acre for acre corn. And I think you can see that again this year.
Yeah, one of the first things I learned when I started hanging around ag circles was that soybeans are a crop of August, right? I mean, things can look poor, but if it rains in August, you can get a lot of help on beans right away.
Yep.
I think, we've been watching the 2012 versus 2013, which path is this market on chart. It's been fun to see the market say, oh yeah, it's 2012 and corn, we go crazy. And then wait a second, it's raining. It's going to be 2013 and we came down and now we're kind of in the middle. But I do think that one of the things that we're going to find out this year versus some of those previous experiences is just how good is the drought tolerance of some of the genetics in these crops, right? That's a bit of an unknown here, isn't it?
It is. And I think this is the biggest quote unquote test plot that we've seen for all the genetic advancement that we've made in the last decade or so. From an agronomic standpoint, 2012 and 2023 are very different years. Probably the biggest differentiating factor is the heat. In 2012, we saw tremendous heat, and so we accumulated a lot of stress units on this corn, where 2023 has been really mild from a temperature standpoint. And so, that's one of the biggest differentiating factors. We also saw the 2012 drought come on later, but I think you're spot on. This is going to be a great opportunity for us to test the mettle on all the genetic advancement, all the changes we've made agronomically to see if we've got the same kind of yield potential as we hope we do.
And from a crop condition perspective, the ratings we've seen, we were, multi-year lows, and also we've kind of crawled back towards where we were a year ago. That was the rain in July that the crop desperately needed. But as we've noted, it remains to be seen whether it was a total crop saver or a semi-crop saver. Okay, let's talk about over-under. So the consensus on corn, 175.5 bushels per acre. Are you going to take the over or under on that in tomorrow's report?
I'm going to go with the under because the report data was gathered almost 4 weeks ago and things have changed rather dramatically in those 4 weeks. So I'm taking the under.
And what about on beans at 51.3 bushels per acre?
Oh, ooh. That one's tough. I'm going to say I'm taking the over.
Okay.
Just by a little bit.
Segue to you, Jake, on that. 175.5 bushels per acre on corn is the consensus for tomorrow. Are you over or under that? Where's USDA going to land?
Man, I think they're going to land probably right on it. I'm going to go against you, Britt. I guess I'll say the over, but they're going to be pretty close to right on it.
And beans at 51.3?
Ooh. I think they're going to go just under. They're going to cut it right to 51. They like round numbers, I think.
So no matter what the report says, Jake, and it'll be interesting to see what the half-life of whatever noise comes out of the report, right? Does it last an hour, a day, a week? Sometimes these reports come out and by Monday, they're like, what report, right? Because something else has moved the needle. From a feeding perspective, stepping back from the noise, what are you working with in terms of our clients on how to approach the markets with corn kind of settling under $5, meal stubbornly staying over $400, but down a little bit here and there? What's your posture with clients on feed right now?
Yeah, I think if you start with corn, we've finally seen, especially in a lot of the Western rail-dependent markets, but even in good parts of the Midwest, we've seen basis kind of settle into some tolerable numbers. And so we're going ahead and getting a little bit of basis bought up for the coming year, but also really encouraging folks to use some sort of strategy if they're not going to own some physical corn here to manage their upside risk, be that call spreads or something to that effect. And then when we look at protein, we've been much more aggressive, I feel like, in the canola space than the soybean meal space, just because that Canadian crop been under a fair bit of heat stress and experiencing some drought again. So I think the top end of yields have come off, as well as seeing some pretty healthy export sales out of Canada. So basis seems to have stabilized and actually perked up a little bit. We've been encouraging folks to get pretty aggressive in buying cash canola, especially with December meal futures down there closer to $3.90, working largely in the October to March timeframe for that. And then working along a similar path in soybean meal. There's some areas of the country we've been a little bit less aggressive because the basis just hasn't cooled off quite as much as we think it should, but still getting a little something on there. I think it's important. I mean, these values are just some of the better ones we've seen in the last 18 months or more for some people. So getting some of this on the books, just in case these yields do really take a big hit and these balance sheets thin out even more than we're anticipating, but trying to remain flexible while also taking advantage of some of this opportunity.
Britt, the soybean balance sheet has more intrigue in some ways than the corn one, doesn't it? I mean, we have China coming back to the U.S. for more and more. You have big crop in Brazil. You have crushing activity, questions about crushing activity around the world. How do you see the soybean balance sheet? Do you think things are going to be veer towards and stay on the tight side, or do you think there's any relief?
It is a very interesting balance sheet, and it's one I think can get tighter as we move forward. We've got really strong crush domestically. Demand there is great. We're going to see additional capacity come online, especially as we move into calendar year 2024. And exports is going to be the really interesting one. We have seen China start coming to the table. We've been a little bit behind where we would like to be given the time of year, but because they are coming to the table, and if they are going to look at kind of building up some of their strategic reserves, U.S. beans are going to be how they do it. U.S. beans just store better than Brazilian or Argentinian beans, and so they will use U.S. beans to do that. I think it's noteworthy, too, if we're going to talk demand for just a second, to mention that it's going to be interesting. While corn has been really lackluster on the demand front, I think this plays well into what Jake is saying and why we like owning some corn at sub $5 levels. Is there's two things that I guess we're watching right now to see how they play out. One, of course, is that Black Sea region and how grain is going to be able to flow out of there, how reliable it's going to be. I think there's just a lot of question marks there, and anybody who's going to be buying grain out of that region is probably not going to solely be depending on them, because there could be some major hiccups in receiving product in a timely fashion and of acceptable quality. But the other one is the northeast region of China has seen some tremendous rainfall as of late. And like everything out of China, there's more questions than answers, and we aren't quite sure what to make of it. But I think that's going to be interesting, because the thing we know about the Chinese is don't believe what they say, believe what they do. And if you start seeing China come in and buying some U.S. corn, that could give indication that there was some damage done to that domestic crop. U.S. is on par now with the Brazilian crop as far as from a price perspective. And like any good buyer, they're going to diversify. They're not going to put all their eggs in one basket. They bought a lot already from Brazil. And I could see them potentially coming back to the U.S. and getting some coverage on now that we're more cost competitive. So that's something that we're also watching. And again, why we really like protecting the upside and owning some physical here on these pullbacks.
All right, guys, great discussion this week. Sorry, I don't have any Taylor Swift or Led Zeppelin or Van Halen trivia for the folks today. We'll see what Mr. Matthews has up his sleeve for the next time. That's going to be a wrap for today's show. Thanks to the stats crew at Everag Insights for the data and charts. Kudos to Corey, our coordinating producer, for making the trains run on time. And thanks especially to Paige, our media magician, for making us look good. Last but not least, thanks to you, our viewers, for tuning in. Be sure to like us on the YouTube channel, and be sure to check us out at insights.ever.ag, our new Insights portal. And as Jim likes to say, we love your feedback. Contact information is on the screen. Thank you.
At EverAg, we partner with every corner of the agriculture industry, from dairy to livestock, crops, and agribusiness, to deliver intelligent supply chain and risk management solutions. We are EverAg, everything agriculture. Learn more at www.ever.ag/everything.